So welcome back after lunch to this session. As you may have heard yesterday, Ian told us we are unfortunately going to miss out on Marie Durnerin, who is not feeling well and can't be with us today. That's the reason for the long lunch break. But fortunately, we are not without Sviatoslav Dmitriev, who is an associate professor of history at Ball State University in Muncie, Indiana. And Sviatoslav has published extensively, I would say, published articles on ancient Greek, Roman, and Byzantine history, and authored books on a range of topics, ranging from city administration in ancient Asia Minor, over the Roman appropriation of Greek political vocabulary, to kinship relations in archaic and classical Athens, and the ways in which ancient and Byzantine rhetorical education has distorted our vision of classical Greece. He's also working on a book project right now, which is slated to be published in 2024, with the title Imperial Dynasties of Byzantium, Translated Text on Byzantine Civilization, which is a uniquely comprehensive, chronologically arranged collection of translated primary evidence for the entire history of the Byzantine Empire. But the topic for today is the Second Athenian League, this period and this nexus through which so many strands of finance and politics and military wind their way, and is such an important backdrop of so much is being discussed these days. So without further ado, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you very much for that invitation. I hope you can all hear me well. I do not claim to have loud voice, so it's an important topic. Well, also let me thank you. Let me thank the organizers of this conference for their very kind invitation, which allowed me to broaden my knowledge in quite a number of fields, to be frank, and also not just for the invitation, but for the superb organization of this conference. And of course, we all are privileged to have this wonderful organization. And one of the displays of this superb organization is that the organizers very kindly printed out hard copies of my slides, which is quite important because since I have to cover quite a lot, I will be moving very fast. At any rate, so we have these hard copies, and if I move the slide and you still need to go through the text, it's here in this package. So thank you very much for that too. Well, also as part of introductory remarks, I'd like to say that first of all, this is still work in progress, and comments and questions and suggestions are very welcome indeed. And also, finally, that this is a huge topic, as Adam already mentioned, and therefore I will be reasonably brief. I will not be touching on everything I know, and of course I will not be touching on what I do not know. So there is quite a lot, so it's just kind of a gist of what has been done so far. Well, having said that, let me begin by mentioning three historians. One of them is Ernst Bedian, the title of whose famous collection of essays has served as a model for my title. His From Plataea to Potidaea examined a 50-year-long heyday of the so-called Delian League, or the best-known display of Athenian imperialism, from its inception after the Battle of Plataea to the battle and siege of Potidaea, which eventually led to the downfall of Athens' empire. Athens' relationship with League members, addressing the view that the League's character evolved in the late 370s and 360s, and lastly, the history of the League from the so-called social war in the mid-350s to the Battle of Chaeronea in 338. My primary concern is not to establish whether the League was an incarnation or approximation of the 5th century empire, but whether it displayed Athens' imperialism, defined broadly as an extension or imposition of power, authority, or influence, according to the Merriam-Webster dictionary. Our single most important source about the Second Athenian League is the so-called Aristoteles decree, or Athenian decree moved by Aristoteles of Marathon and adopted in the 7th Prytany of the archonship of Mnemosyniacus of February-March 377, which is often interpreted as the League's founding document. Diodorus and Xenophon are our literary sources about the events surrounding the League's foundation. According to Diodorus, after the liberation of the Academia and Thebes from Sparta in the winter of 379-378, Athens sent envoys to Greek city-states under Spartan control with an appeal to hold on to the common freedom. Then the Athenians established a common council of all the allies in Athens, and, I quote, the Athenians and the rest of the Greeks who participated in the council were allied with the Thebans, end of quote. Well, after the Spartan failed attack on the Piraeus led by Sphodrias in March of 378, continues Diodorus, the Athenians declared war on Sparta and admitted the Thebans into the common council, the Synedrion, on terms equal in all respects. Well, Xenophon mentions the recovery of the Academia from the Spartan garrison by the Thebans with the Athenian help, and continues with the raid of Sphodrias and his trial and acquittal, after which the Athenians gave aid to the Boeotians with all zeal. Diodorus is unreliable on dates, and Xenophon is frustrating. He hints at so much and explains so little, well, probably because he was writing for contemporaries. Well, as many have noted, he doesn't even mention the League's foundation. Opinions on the date of the League's foundation have expectedly disagreed. Some think that its foundation followed upon the liberation of the Academia in the winter of 379-378 and preceded and precipitated Sphodrias' attack on the Piraeus in March of 378, while others put the beginning of the League in the autumn of 379, that is, even before the recovery of the Academia. Still others see the League's foundation as a consequence of Sphodrias' attack and dated to the period from the spring of 378 to early 377, since, first, the Aristotle's decree mentions the Synedrion as already in place, and second, Diodorus, although shaky on absolute dates, marks the sequence of Thebes first becoming an ally of Athens and her League after the liberation of the Academia, and then joining the League after the raid of Sphodrias. This traditional explanation can be questioned. Thebes joined the League and acknowledged Athens' hegemony, probably because not of Sphodrias' attack, as the majority opinion holds it, but because of Agesilaus' raid into Boeotia in the summer of 378, which posed a real danger to Thebes' independence and, as the Thebans suspected quite correctly, was not going to be the last such Spartan incursion. Thebes' reaction to Agesilaus' campaign would still give her time to join the League before the adoption of the Aristotle's decree in February-March 377. Well, however, the biggest challenge in establishing the date of the League's foundation is to figure out its process. The usual view has been that Athens' bilateral alliances with other founding members were, so to say, converted into the League and gradually, so to say, augmented, so that the League's foundation was complete only with the adoption of the Aristotle's decree. But Athens neither was a League member, nor accordingly had a seat in the Synedrion, nor did bilateral treaties constitute a comprehensive alliance. Remembering one of our conveners' propensity for seeing parallels between ancient Greek and modern events, we might as well look at the history of the foundation of the European Union. The European Union's former predecessor, the European Coal and Steel Community, didn't just expand into the European Union via augmentation. Representatives of its founding countries, France, Belgium, Western Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg, put their signatures to the Maastricht Treaty, together with the other 6 members of the European communities, in the same way as the countries that would be joining later. Based on Diodorus' information, Akame, Bernard, Cargill, Butler, and tentatively, as far as I can see, Ochipinti, believed that, likewise, Athens and Thebes made 2 treaties, and that the second treaty sealed Thebes' membership in the League. Other League members evidently also signed new treaties when they joined the League. It is also for this reason that the Aristoteles decree appears to have been neither the league's founding document nor the list of its members. Many have noted that the decree neglects the membership list beginning in about mid-370s. This neglect explains why the number of the allies listed in the Aristoteles decree did not correspond to the total number of the league members, as far as we can figure it out. The Aristoteles decree was a piece of Athenian public propaganda, which worked both ways. It safeguarded the rights of the current and future league members, namely to be free and autonomous, being governed under whatever form of government they wished, neither receiving a garrison, nor submitting to a governor, nor paying tribute, and appealed to all other Greeks, except the subjects of the Persian king in Asia Minor, as an incentive to join the league, and at the same time it was also a threat to those who declined the invitation. Since only members of the league were free from Athenian intervention, the decree perfectly illustrates Athenian imperialism. The decree also reflects Athens' policy to use the autonomy clause for demolishing military alliances of other Greek cities, including members of the league. More specifically, the decree commanded 3 Athenian ambassadors to be sent to Thebes, who are to persuade the Thebans of whatever good thing they can. Well, this information has received very diverse interpretation. I don't go into details here, but I join a few, actually minority, of the people who believe that this public statement aimed to undermine Thebes' resurrected leadership of Boeotian. The Thebans either combined their league membership with their Boeotian hegemony, or they left the league or forsook its membership once they had reconstituted their Boeotian federation. On the level of individual cities, if the Thebans established their control over Histiaea in 377-376, the Athenians quickly turned it into a league member. Nor did Athens allow the Thebans to join the league as Boeotians. Even more importantly, modern scholarship has ignored that the Aristoteles decree aimed to undermine not only Spartan and Theban hegemonies, but also hegemonic aspirations by league members, in another display that the league was Athens' imperialistic tool from the beginning. Well, this raises another important question, that is, did Athens keep the pledges she made in the Aristoteles decree to protect the freedom and autonomy of the league members? Oscillating between the two extremes, either the league was the empire from the beginning, or it never was, most scholars believe that the league eventually transformed into the empire and started to look very much the Athenian empire of the 5th century. Among the adherents of this view, Claude Mossé spoke about the league as the renaissance of Athens' hegemony. Sige believed that Athens gradually began to slip back into her old ways. Badian famously asserted that the ghost of the 5th century empire dominated the politics of 4th century Athens, and Chaplin noted that the league's slippage towards 5th century behavior is unmistakable. The moment of this transformation has been connected with either the Battle of Leuctra, that is, when Sparta's decisive defeat, the league lost its initially declared purpose of protecting the Greeks from Spartan domination, or the Battle of Mantinea, or some other event. Well, still others, including Drea and Boni, believe that the league occupied an intermediary position between a free alliance and an empire. Well, Mossé and other adherents of the view that the league eventually evolved into Athens' empire argue based on the establishment of Athenian cleroches, garrisons and governors in league member cities, and Athens' collection of so-called contributions, avancées, from them. As to cleroches, even the adherents of this view have rejected or doubted interpreting an entry in the navy list as meaning that the Athenians sent out a cleroche to a place whose name did not survive at some time in the 360s. This is the first text here on the slide and in your packages. Mossé and Badian mentioned the establishment of Athenian cleroches in Potidaea in 362, the second text, and Samos in 361, the third text. The problem is that neither of these places belong to the League. Well, the same applies to the Athenian clerics settled in the Chersonesus in the 350s. However, it needs to be mentioned that while no direct evidence exists that Athens established clericates on the territory of League members, other Greeks remained open to Athenian imperialistic aggressions. The chronologically earliest evidence for the establishment of Athenian garrisons in the 4th century is probably Xenophon's reference that after and under the provisions of the Sparta Peace of 371, the Athenians proceeded to withdraw their garrisons from the cities and to send after Iphicrates and his ships, and they compelled them to give back everything which he had captured after the time when the oaths were taken at Sparta. Well, however, the text does not show that this applied to League members, whereas as common peace, the Sparta Peace of 371, just like the King's Peace and the Sparta Peace of 375, had a universal application. As noted by Cargill, the only absolutely identifiable garrisons or governors in League members' lands are those at Abdera of 375 and on Andros and Amargos during the Social War period. However, as often with the Second League, disagreements abound on dates and meaning of relevant evidence. Another member of the League that could have had an Athenian governor was Carsaira, although the nature of this evidence and the status of Carsaira herself have received different interpretations. Such evidence is too thin to support claims of garrisons as displays of the mounting Athenian imperialism, but this situation also meant that Athens felt free to impose garrisons in non-allied territories. While the Aristoteles decree guaranteed various freedoms and autonomy to League members, Athens' treaties with individual members began to include so-called loopholes. Well, for example, as you can see here in figure 12, Athens pledged that the Iberian city of Chalkis would have freedom and autonomy and would not be garrisoned or submitted to a governor or required to pay tribute, contrary to the decisions of the allies. Likewise, Athens' treaty with Carsaira stipulated that Carsaira would not make war and peace without Athens and the allies and would do all the rest in accordance with the decisions of the allies. In other words, governors and garrisons could thus be established by the decision of the Synedrion. And while one can hardly doubt that Athens influenced the Synedrion's decisions as she liked, the Athenians formally did not break any pledges they publicly made in the Aristoteles decree. Payments of the syntaxes by League members have also been interpreted as displays of the mounting Athenian imperialism. However, this view looks questionable as well if, as many believe, League members started to pay the syntaxes from the very beginning. Others guess that the syntaxes began as sporadic contributions before being institutionalized as yearly payments at some point in time. Except that the Aristoteles decree expressly forbade collecting forests from League members in early 377, the evidence is lacking for either view before the first year of the syntaxes collected during the campaign of Timotheus in 373, which has already been mentioned, actually. I think yesterday it was quite extensively discussed. The general understanding has been that the syntaxes was instituted in that year. Well, this text is interesting for more than this one reason. It refers to the Theban admiral as Boeotian, thus probably pointing to Thebes' desire to control Boeotia, if not to Athens' acquiescence to the Thebans' ambitions. And it also shows that the Thebans produced their ships for their participation in the campaign and expected a compensation. This compensation was derived either from the military fund. Elsewhere, the text says that the money Timotheus had received for this campaign, and from which, as he claimed, he had paid the Boeotian admiral, came from the military fund that was partially financed by the Athenian aesphora, but not by the allied contributions, or from the syntaxes of the League members. An inscription from 346 might illustrate the latter situation. It allegedly mentions the syntaxes used to pay garrison soldiers in Mytilene after she had re-established her alliance with Athens. This is similar to using the syntaxes as payment for garrison soldiers in Andros, according to the Synedrion's decision. The evidence for the syntaxes is not only limited, but also quite confusing. For example, the same honorific decree by Athens for Tenedos, dated to 340-339 BC, which praised it for having lent money to Athens, seems to show both that the Synedrion continued to assess contributions of individual members until the end of the League's existence, and that Athens had the last word, as she ensured that Tenedos was not to be subject to any exactions by a general or some other person in money or in some other way, or an assessment of syntaxes by the Synedrion before the loan was to be repaid. Xenophon's vague reference to Iphicrates' naval campaign in 372, when Iphicrates sailed to Kephallenia and exacted money both from those who were willing to pay and from those who were not, might have pointed to non-members of the League who could be forced to pay to Athens, as implied in the Aristoteles decree, or distinguished between the allies who were willing or not to make contributions in 372. In the latter case, Xenophon could have meant widespread areas of contributions. The lack of specific examples of Athens' aggression against members of the League has made modern scholars develop the view that Athens' imperialism in the 360s, while not necessarily affecting the League members directly, caused them to be alarmed and alienated them from Athens by resurrecting memories of the 5th century. The common opinion has been that this mounting tension was what eventually led to the social war. This brings us to the social or allied war, usually dated to the period from 357 to 355, although opinions disagree, as we noted earlier today. Well, to a large extent, the view that the Second League eventually evolved into the Athenian Empire relies on the vision of the social war as a rebellion of some of League members against Athens' growing encroachment on their freedom and autonomy. Well, hence, as noted by Handlower, Cargill's view that Athens kept the pledges outlined in the Aristoteles decree and his lack of an explanation for the social war makes its outbreak quite unintelligible. The same was true of Griffith, who occupied a stance quite close to that of Cargill. Dreher's idea that some members of the League wished to leave it after neither Sparta, following her defeat at Leuctra, nor Thebes after the Battle of Mantinea any longer posed a danger, makes a lot of sense. However, Dreher identified no immediate reason for the move. If Athens kept her pledges, why did some members revolt so that it was only the interference of the king that ended the war? And why did other members not follow their suit? Well, another problem is that we only hear of Byzantium, Rhodes, Chios, and Kos participating in the social war, and these are the places marked on this map. Well, still, Marshall stressed Mapsolus's support to oligarchic factions as the final impetus for, and Cares' aggressive attitude as the immediate cause of the war. Still, the usual explanation for the social war has been the rise of Athens' imperialism. Butler noted Athens' departure from her earlier principles and the rise of her imperialistic policy at the turn of the 350s, so that Athenians' imperialism alienated, I quote, Greek islanders and those in the littoral states that no longer saw in Athens the gallant defender of their rights as free Greeks, but as their old oppressors, end of quote. And Akame and Carlier explained the outbreak of the social war by Athens' extraction of the syntaxes. Occupying a close stance, Bedian painted the image of Cares, shot on cash, sailing to Chios or Rhodes and extorting some money either by blackmail or on the claim for areas of the syntaxis. Cockwell spoke both of the allies' fear of Charis and of the economic decline of Athens and Greece in general in 360s, and of course this is quite close to what Mossé was saying, which spurred the imperialist war party, provoking the counter-reaction of Athens' allies in the form of the social war. Well, however, again, each of these points can be debated. For example, there is a big debate whether there was an imperialistic party in Athens at that time. Well, another fact is that Charis evidently managed to squeeze the syntaxis of the paltry amount of 60 talents from the islanders, if we believe Aeschines, and Aeschines, of course, was yesterday accused of not being historically correct. But it was only after he had departed against the revolting states. And this could well be the areas in syntaxis which were quite widespread before and after the social war. Views on Athens' extraction of the syntaxis as the main cause of the social war largely rest on evidence for the small amount of Athens' state revenues after that war was over. However, the amount of the collected syntaxis appears to have been not directly correlated with the size of Athens' income, and I think we already touched upon the topic that Athens economically was doing quite well in the late 350s and later. Well, as I would like to point out, the theory of the growing Athenian imperialism in 360s neither does nor can explain the outbreak of the social war. Nor is there any clear evidence that the social war was an allied response to the mounting Athenian imperialism. Again, all the evidence that we have points out to 4 city-states participating in this conflict only. Well, what was then the reason behind it? Well, retrospectively reflecting on the social war, Isocrates on the peace declared that Athens should make peace with all Greeks by extending the principles of the king's peace beyond the members of the League, as limited in the Aristoteles decree to all of them. They all should be autonomous and garrisoned and in possession of their territory. The hypocritical Isocrates was acting in Athenian interests, as usual. Applying the principles of the king's peace would effectively undermine not only Thebes' control of Boeotian cities, which the Thebans came to possess contrary to the oaths, but also local hegemonies established by League members. Such local aspirations explain the words of Demosthenes that the rebels accused Athens of plotting against them, while the Rhodians, I quote, resented that you recovered what was your own, Tahumeter. Well, plotting evidently meant a threat to use force. The islanders revolted and united after they learned of Athens' plan to send a military force against them. But why did Athens use military force against some of her League's members? Bedian translated Tahumetera as your own property, probably followed by Trevet with your possessions, while Vichk suggested your rights. Such interpretations, however, do not fit with the overall tenor and meaning of Demosthenes' phrase. What was that the Athenians had recovered that, according to Demosthenes, the Rhodians resented as threatening their freedom, which, ironically, for Demosthenes, they lost not to the Athenians, but to the barbarians after having rejected an equal alliance with Athens? Well, it was not so much, it was the Athenian League, which for some, including Rhodians, meant a threat, not so much to their freedom or finance, but to their local hegemonies. Athenians did what the Rhodians, the Byzantines, and other local powers wanted to do, by establishing their military alliance. Diodorus pointedly noted that Chios, Rhodes, and Kos brought their own allies against Charis, meaning that they had built their own local federations. Demosthenes on the freedom of the Rhodians reminded his audience how the Byzantines had seized Chalcedon and Cilimbria, which the Byzantines made tributary to themselves and included in their territory, contrary to all oaths and agreements which guarantee the autonomy of those cities. The same could be the case of Perinthus. Demosthenes' indignation at Byzantium doing what Athens was doing is rather charming. But the fact remains, Byzantium, as other members of the League, swore an oath to preserve the autonomy of all other allies, which effectively undermined building up local hegemonies, only to break that oath, just like it seems Rhodes, Chios, and Kos were doing. The main reason behind the social war, I suggest, was thus political, not financial, and the initiative, if I may say so, came not from Athens, but from the allies, who wanted to establish their own local hegemonies, thus provoking Athens to respond formally based on the League's foundational principles. Athens showed similar attitude toward other League members after putting down the second revolt of the city of Ulis on Chios in the late 360s. Athens expressly prohibited political cooperation between Chian cities. According to Aeschines, as a result of their naval expedition in 357, the Athenians became the masters of Evdoria and righteously and justly restored the cities themselves in their constitutions to those who entrusted them to the Athenians. Cockwell, Bertolli, and Occhitinti interpreted Aeschines' words as referring to Athens' bilateral treaties with Evdoian cities. This interpretation relies on Athens' treaty with the Evdoian city of Carystus, which rejoined the League in 357. Regardless of the date or dates of the existence of the Evdoian Federation, which turns out to be an overly complicated subject, what is clear is that Athens' treaty with Carystus, which elsewhere mentions that Athenian embassies were also sent to Eretria and Chalkis and to Hestiaea, likewise reflected Athens' policy of establishing bilateral agreements which undermined local hegemonies, which Athens was not yet ready to acknowledge. This change happened at the turn of the 330s, when Athens cooperated with Carlis's Evdoian Federation and came to terms with the Thebes Boeotian Federation. Athens' alliance with Chalkis stipulated that Chalkis neither sat in the League's Synedrion nor paid the syntaxes. Athens and Thebes likewise made a bilateral agreement in 339. Why did certain Greek city-states choose bilateral treaties with Athens over League membership even when faced with impending danger from Philip's Macedonia? The reason was not their unwillingness to pay the syntaxes, as some have argued, but their hegemonic aspirations. It was also these new political realities that eventually made Athens acknowledge local hegemonies, as demonstrated by the Evdoian Eretria and Oreus. With Demosthenes' backing, they were detached from the League and joined to Calais' Evdoian Federation, to which they now paid their syntaxes. A similar situation occurred on the eve of the Battle of Chaeronea. As you can see here, that is slide 30, when Demosthenes, eager to make an anti-Philip alliance with Thebes, handed over the whole of Boeotia to Thebes by moving a decree that, I quote, if any city secedes from Thebes, the Athenians are to support the Boeotians in Thebes, end of quote. The decree has been quite correctly acknowledged as a display of Athenian acquiescence to the Theban hegemony over Boeotia. In both cases, Demosthenes recognized the hegemony of local political powers, thereby undermining the Second League's foundational principles. To conclude, while cases of Athenian interference in the affairs of League members were very few and often readily justifiable, and while there is no clear indication that the social war responded to the rise of Athens' imperialism, we can still see the Second League as a display of Athenian imperialistic policy. Well, first, because while formally protecting League members, it untied Athens' hands in relations with non-members, and second, because, almost until its very end, the League served as Athens' tool for undermining local hegemonies in the form of military alliances, both by non-members, such as Sparta and then Thebes, and members, such as cities of Evdoria, Chios, Thebes, and Byzantium, among others. Thank you.